Hello, Robs. We're back with another haunted house story, ghost story, should I say. And this one is called The Haunted Homestead by Mrs. Emma Den Southworth. I think it was originally published around 1860. I have a full book, but it's too fragile to handle, so I'm going with a secondary copy, which actually opens and lays flat and is easily accessible. The foreword to this story comes in the preface of the original book from 1860, February 1st. The novelettes that comprise this volume are all founded on facts, stranger than fiction, that have come under my own personal observation or have been communicated to me by persons of reliable veracity. For the seemingly supernatural phenomena of the haunted homestead and the specter revels, which I believe is contained within that book, the full short story book, I have endeavored to find a natural solution, though it is but fair to add that many of the mysteries remain unexplained even unto this day. The Haunted Homestead. This is an 1897 version, publication. I want to be careful with this book so I don't wreck it. The Haunted Homestead. A residence for woman, child, or man, a dwelling place and yet no habitation, a house but under some prodigious ban of excommunication. Hood. In childhood, I always had a fearless faith in ghosts. I desired before all sights to see them, and threw myself in the way of meeting them, whenever and wherever there seemed the slightest possibility of so doing. Whenever there were mysterious sounds heard in the night, I listened with breathless interest, arose from bed in silent eagerness, and went stealing on tiptoe through the dark house in the hopes of meeting the ghosts. Once I met a severe blow on the nose from the sharp edge of an open door, and once a tomcat who made one spring from the top of the pantry shelves upon my head, and another thence through a broken window pane. I would have liked to fancy him a ghostly cat, only I knew him too well for our own Tom, the cunningest thief that ever run on 4 feet. Another time, perambulating through the house at midnight, I surprised a burglar, who, mistaking me in the darkness for the master of the house, the watch, or an ambush, jumped straight over my head, or past me, I hardly knew which, in my astonishment, and made his escape at the back door. But I must say that I never met a ghost, or even a vestige of a ghost but I think I will begin at the beginning and tell you the whole story. At the Newton Academy, where I was educated among 200 fellow pupils, I had but one bosom friend and confidant, quite enough in all discretion for one individual, though you are aware that most young ladies have at least a dozen. My female Pythias was Mathilde Laguerre, a beautiful and warm-hearted Creole from New Orleans. Orestes and Pylades, Castor and Pollux, the Siamese twins, are but faint illustrations of the closeness of our friendship. To say that we were inseparable is nothing to the fact. We were united, blended, consolidated, and the one angel of Swedenborg, formed of two congenial spirits, is the only sufficiently expressive example of our union of hearts. It was of little use for me to study a lesson, for though I had never looked at it, if Mathilde, I don't know how to say that, Mathilde, I'll just say Mathilde, only committed hers to memory, I was sure in some occult manner to have mine at my fingers' ends, or to other hand. If I studied, Mathilde might play. She would recite her task just as well. Moreover, if I told the story, Mathilde would swear to it, and vice versa. In short, we too were in all cases too many for all the rest of the school, principal, assistants, masters, and pupils, and we afforded a striking illustration of the truth of Robert Browning's lines, though I suppose the latter alluded to a true marriage and not a schoolgirl friendship. If any two creatures grow into one, they should do more than the world has done, by each apart ever so weak, yet vainly through the world should you seek. For the knowledge and the might, which in such union grew their right. As Mathilde was rich and I was comparatively poor, this friendship. Whoa, there goes the page. That's not what I wanted to do here. That's not what I wanted to do. Oh no. Oh dear. Oh dear. This is not cool. Brought me many advantages, among which was the privilege of annual travel and change of scene. About the 1st of every July, Mathilde's father and mother would leave their sugar plantation in Louisiana and travel northward. Don't want to ruin this book. They usually arrived at the Newton Academy about the 10th of the month in time to be present at the annual examination and exhibition of the pupils. Upon these occasions, Mathilde, who possessed quickness and veracity rather than depth or strength of mind, generally achieved a brilliant success, though she often told me that her triumph in being first at these milestones on the road to fame was nothing more than the success of swift-footed, careless hare over the slow and painstakingly tortoise who would win the race at the goal. However this might be, Mr. and Mrs. Laguerre were equally proud of their daughter's genius and beauty, and to reward her industry and application, as they called it, they took her each year to spend the long vacation of July and August with them in making the tour of Virginia Springs, which are the most frequented by Southerners, for the convenience of bringing their servants with them. Upon one occasion, however, that of the vacation preceding the last year of Mathilde's residence at school, Mr. Laguerre determined to vary their usual route by going to the northern watering places of Saratoga and Ballston, and as usual, I, with the consent of my guardians, accompanied the party as their invited guest. We arrived at Saratoga at the very height of the season. In all, I suppose that there might have been several thousand visitors at the Springs. The United States Hotel at which we stopped was uncomfortably crowded, and though Mr. Laguerre grumbled in a very gentlemanly way, and Mrs. Laguerre wished herself home again, Mathilde and I enjoyed the crowd for the crowd's sake, and experienced the truth of the popular adage of the more, the merrier. At a place like that, even in the ballroom, distinction was almost as impossible as it is said to be in London, where now that the Duke is dead, no one is anyone. Scarcely anybody was anybody at Saratoga that season. Many a village beauty, the toast of her own little circle, and many a city belle, the queen of her own coterie, who went thither reasonably expected to make a sensation, found herself and her claims to notice lost in a brilliant multitude, all more or less expectant or disappointed. I thought Mathilde, with her tall and beautifully rounded form, stately head, pure olive complexion shaded by jet black ringlets and lighted up by laughing black eyes bridged over with arch and flexible black eyebrows, would attract some attention. Not a bit of it. Heiress and beauty as she was, Mathilde Laguerre was merely one in the crowd. There were hundreds with equal or greater claims to distinction, and so our beautiful Mathilde was not enthroned. Of course, she soon attracted around her a circle of old and new acquaintances, and had from them a due share of attention. Among the first of these new acquaintances was a young gentleman of the name of Howard. His introduction to our party, without being romantic, was certainly marked by singularity. It occurred the third day after our arrival at one of the weekly balls at the United States. It happened to be a fine, cool evening, and the assembly upon the occasion was unusually large. The saloon was quite crowded, leaving but little room for the motions of the dancers. Mathilde was looking very beautiful that night. She wore a dress with a threefold skirt, a very fine, transparent thal over rose-colored silk, and which, with every motion, floated around her graceful form with a mist-like softness and lightness. A berth and falls of the finest lace veiled her rounded arms and neck. She wore no jewels, but a wreath of rich, white heliotrope crowned her jetty ringlets, and a bouquet of the same odoriferous flowers employed her slender fingers. Yes, she was looking very lovely. Nevertheless, Mathilde, as well as myself, seemed destined to adorn the sofa as a wallflower all the evening, for set after set formed until everyone was complete. The music struck up and the dancing commenced. Still no one came near us, nor did we even so much as see, within the range of our vision, one single person that we knew. Mathilde voted that this very stupidest ball she was ever at, and hoped her papa would never come to Saratoga again. I, for my part, fell into the study of faces, and through them into the study of character, and through that into dreaming. Presently a head, start not, gentle reader, there was a living body attached to it, attracted my particular attention. It was not because it was above every other head present, though had not this been the case, I should not at that distance have seen it. Nor was it because it was a very handsome one, for there were others much more handsomer. But it was a very remarkable characteristic, individual sort of head, a monarchical head, with a forehead that in its commanding height and breadth seemed the natural throne of intellectual sovereignty, with a strongly and clearly marked nose and mouth, with eyes full of calm power that surveyed the multitude below with the quiet interest of a king inspecting his army on some festive parade day. Magnus Apollo were the words that sprang alive to my lips as I laid my hand upon the soft white arm of Mathilde and called her attention to this stranger. Hush! He is looking this way, said my companion, blushing and casting down her eyes. I knew very well if he was looking this way at whom he must be looking at, so did not feel Mathilde's embarrassment in again raising my eyes to the Magnus Apollo. When I did so, I perceived that he was in conversation with another gentleman, whom I recognized as Mr. the proprietor of the house. I saw Mr. bow and precede the stranger, conducting him to the presence of Mr. Laguerre, to whom he immediately introduced him. I saw Mr. Laguerre and the stranger approaching our quarter of the room, and I thought I understood it all. I was not mistaken. Mr. Laguerre presented the stranger as Mr. Howard of Boston, first to me, whom he favored with a bow, but certainly not with a single glance, and next to Mathilde, whom he almost immediately petitioned to become his partner in the next quadrille. Miss Laguerre bowed a gracious acceptance to his suit. The presentation over Mr. Laguerre went to rejoin his wife, who could not endure to be left alone. Mr. Howard remained standing before us, and soon, by the brilliancy, variety, and interest of his conversation, engaged both his hearers. He was certainly a man of the most distinguished and commanding presence that I had ever seen, and one for whom every hour's acquaintance increased our esteem. When the new quadrille formed, with a graceful bow, he extended his hand to Mathilde and led her to the head of one of the sets. He danced as well as he conversed. Why should I run into detail? Mathilde's fancy was captivated. They finished the quadrille, and for the remainder of the evening, Mr. Howard's attentions, though very devoted, were marked by too much delicacy and good taste to attract notice from anyone except her to whom they were directed. The impression made upon Mathilde was yet not sufficiently deep to render her reserved with me upon this subject. Consequently, when the ball was over and we had reached our double-bedded chamber, my friend broke forth in eager exclamations. Did you ever see such a fine-looking person, Agnes? And then his conversation, how brilliant and how varied, how much he must have traveled, and then how well he dances. Pshaw, said I. Oh, what a fall was there from the sublime to the ridiculous. Yes, but he does dance well, and let me tell you that very few men can do so. He strikes the nice balance between le grand and le frivole in his manner, and then his name, Howard, la creme de la creme of aristocratic names. Don't you remember Lilian Blaine of the house of Howard? And so she rattled on, talking incessantly of the new acquaintance, until we went to bed, and I went to sleep, leaving her still talking. The next morning I noticed that Mathilde spent more than usual time and attention upon her foulette. She looked very pretty, when did she not, in her embroidered cambric morning dress, with no ornament but her jetty ringlets flowing down each side her freshly blooming face. When we went downstairs, there was Mr. Howard waiting in the hall to offer Mathilde his arm to the breakfast table. Afterward, at the ladies' bowling alley, who but Mr. Howard stood at Mathilde's elbow to hand the balls? To hand the balls. What does that mean? Oh, the bowling balls, you dullard. Who took her in to dinner? Who made a horse block of his knee and a stepping stone of the palm of his hand to lift Mathilde into her saddle? Who attended her in her afternoon ride and her evening walk in the duet with the piano accompaniment at night? Howard, still Howard. Until after several weeks of this association, at last, Papa opened his eyes and inquired first of himself and next of his host. Mr. Howard, sir. Mr. Howard is a very talented young mechanic of Boston, answered the proprietor. Oh, sorry. Who is this Mr. Howard who is paying such very particular attention to my daughter? Mr. Howard, sir. Mr. Howard is a very talented young mechanic of Boston, answered the proprietor. A what? Questioned the astonished old gentleman. A very accomplished young machinist and mathematical instrument maker, sir, who has realized quite a handsome fortune by his patented improvement. And the foul fiend, exclaimed the old aristocrat, throwing up his hands in consternation as he trotted off. His daughter talking, dancing, riding, flirting with the mechanic. Oh, horror, horror, horror. The result of this was that after Mr. Laguerre's perturbed feelings had become somewhat calmed, he called for his bill, settled it, took 4 places in the morning coach, ordered his servants to pack up, and the next day set out for the south. He was very much disturbed. Miss Laguerre said nothing, but poor Mathilde was miserable, having been made to feel that she had unwittingly brought discredit upon herself and all her family. Mr. Laguerre left Mathilde and myself at our school, and with his wife proceeded to Louisiana. I soon saw that the warm-hearted young Southern maiden really was, or believed herself to be, the subject of a deep and unhappy attachment. She became reserved to all, even to me, and her health suffered. As weeks grew into months, her indisposition increased. One day her emotions broke the bounds of reserve, and throwing herself into my arms, she exclaimed, "Oh, Agnes, if Frank would only write to me, I should not feel so wretched." Frank? Who is Frank, my love? I inquired in surprise, for I had never heard this name among our acquaintances. She blushed deeply. "Oh, I mean Mr. Howard, you know. Frank Howard." "No, I did not know. Has it come to this? And do you call him Frank? And do you perhaps correspond with him?" "Oh, Mathilde, my dear, take care." "Oh, no, I do not correspond with him, never have done so. He never even asked me, but after Pa got so high with him, he looked mournful and dignified, and took leave of me. Oh, you might write to me. Mathilde, knowing your father's sentiments, he would not, as a man of honor, commence a correspondence with you. But tell me, dear, how far this affair has gone." "Oh, very far indeed. He was going to ask me of Papa that very day we left." "Wait, Mathilde, you are so young. If this is anything more serious than a passing fancy on both sides, he will delay until you leave school, and then he will first seek you at your father's house. This is the only course for a man of honor in such a case, you are aware. Little hope in seeing me at my father's house with my father's estimate of a mechanic, but I do not the least believe that Frank Howard is a mechanic. He does not look like one." "Nonsense, my dear Mathilde. He is an intelligent Boston mechanic who has made a valuable invention that has brought him a fortune. That is all about it." Still Mathilde's health waned, and at last the principal of our academy wrote to her parents, who came, and finding her condition more precarious than they had anticipated, removed her from school and carried her home. Mathilde could not bring against her friend the same charge that she had brought against her lover, for I requested a frequent correspondence and faithfully kept up my part of it. I remained at Newton for nearly 12 months after Mathilde left, and this time passed in so great a monotony by me was full of event for Mathilde and those connected with her. In the first place, she accompanied her friends on a short visit to Europe, and returning, entered society at New Orleans with some éclat. Then followed her father a succession of losses, one growing out of another until his fortune was so reduced as to make it necessary for him to retrench and change his whole style of living. Under such circumstances, his pride would not permit him to remain in that part of the country when for so many years he had lived grand seigneur. His wife was a Virginian by birth and education, and in changing her home preferred to return to her native state. Therefore, Mr. Laguerre purchased a small estate lying within a fertile gap of the Alleghanies, to which, in the spring of the next year, he removed his family. Up to this time, Mathilde had heard nothing directly from her Saratoga lover, but had learned through the newspapers that he has been nominated to represent his district in the National House of Representatives. Hoping much from the two circumstances of her own reduction in worldly fortune and her lover's elevation in social rank, which must bring them nearer together in position, she had called the attention of her father to the announcement of Mr. Howard's nomination. But her fond expectations were soon dissipated by the old aristocrat's comment, "Oh yes, my dear, I see. An upstart can get into Congress now. Really, a private station is the seat of honor, but the comfort remains that a patrician by birth is still a patrician, no matter how low his worldly fortunes. A plebeian is still a plebeian, even though accidents or caprice may constitute him a legislator. And now what shall I do, Agnes?" wrote Mathilde after recounting these things. "Hope. If Mr. Howard is as constant as you appear to be, you have everything to expect from time and change ordered by Providence," was my written reply. I finally left school at the commencement of the summer vacation following the spring, in which Mr. Laguerre's family removed to their mountain home in Virginia. It was just before the ensuing Christmas that I received an invitation from Mathilde to come up and spend the holidays with her at her father's new home. In extending this invitation, she wrote, "I do not know, dear Agnes, how much or how little you may feel disposed to credit these modern so-called spiritual manifestations, these rappings, table tippings, etc., but I know your strong penchant for the supernatural and your inveterate habit of ghost hunting, and I do assure you, if it will be any inducement for you to come to us, that our home contains as inexplicable a mystery as ever frightened." I lost my spot. Human inhabitants away, and doomed a dwelling place to desolation and decay, and this haunting presence infests a house in a neighborhood as yet innocent of spirit rappings, table tippings, and such like deviltries, as it is of railroads, steamboats, and telegraph wires. But I shall say no more of this mystery until I see you face to face, except this, that even my unbelieving Pa talks of selling the place unless the nuisance is explained and removed. I think that it was the existence of this darkly intimated specter that fascinated me to the point of accepting Mathilde's invitation. Ghost hunting was my one weakness, perhaps I should say monomania. I secretly hoped that there might be a haunted chamber in the old house, and that they might put me to sleep in it. Furthermore, that I might be favored with an interview with the ghost. I resolved to go. No persuasion had power to withhold me, no obstacle to prevent me. My only brother was expected home to spend Christmas, but I would not wait for him. I would, on the contrary, ask Mr. Laguerre to invite him to follow me. The weather was very severe. The snow covered the ground to the depth of 2 feet on a level, and what it might be among the ravines of the mountain I was going to cross, I feared to conjecture. Nevertheless, to go I was determined. And with that, I'll stop, bravs. Until next time, goodbye.